Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the new year. I'm excited about kicking off this project. This first session is going to be mostly a background session, and we'll actually start building patterns next week. I have to do some more infrastructure. It's both requiring a bit more work, and to be candid, I had a really good time in the holiday season. I hope you all did too, and had a lot of grandkids here and did a lot of fun stuff with them and my family. So I'm going to do this. I think we have some new people here, but I know some new people are going to be watching the recording. So I'm going to start off explaining a little bit of the background first. And this is what I call the Amplio Capabilities and Patterns project. And a brief introduction of me and what I'm up to is um, basically, and I'm sorry, I've got multiple screens because I'm going to flash between them at times. But hopefully they're large enough for you. So I am Al Shalloway. I've been in Agile space a long time. I was not at the original Agile Manifesto, but I was invited back for the 10-year anniversary because of the work, I suppose, I'd done with Kanban. Also, I had been a leader in XP and Scrum prior to that. I'd been fairly vocal. And it was very interesting that at that time there was no agreement of what Agile was by the combination of people who had signed it 10 years before and the newbies that came. So we talk about Agile like there's an agreement on what it is. There hasn't been one for 13 years, at least. I'm not sure there was one even before we got there. I was CEO of Net Objectives. That's where I got a lot of my experience working with some really top consultants. I was the PMI for a little more than a couple of years. And then I left and formed Success Engineering. And Success Engineering has been a dual prong approach. One approach is just actually writing a system, creating a system that you could use on its own. You could use it to supplement what you're doing. You can use it to extend an existing framework. It really was designed from the ground up based on what I learned over the, I guess, 22 years or so of working from 1999 to 2021 in the Agile space. I consider even before we had a name, extreme programming was kind of the Agile space at the time. And Scrum, even though it existed before XP, didn't catch on until after XP got popular. I've also been with SAFe, Gold Partner, SBC, Trainer, and all that. I've written several books. Oh, I don't have my latest book up here. Had a feeling maybe I had an old one. It's The Lean Agile Way, which is a co-authoring with Gary Rupp, uh, Richard Naster, and Steve Pereira. And it's really a good book. But what I want to talk about is the context for this project before I kind of delve into it. This is kind of the context. This is kind of the project. And to know this, you have to look at what's the purpose of it? It's not just to get a bunch of patterns out there. It's not just to get a whole bunch of solutions out there. Um, the Please be careful about screen things. I should actually disallow that, but it'll go away. Uh, so the first thing is you've got to be clear on what your purpose is. Mine is about creating value for critical stakeholders. Okay. To do this, you have to understand the principles of flow, the physics of flow, as it's been termed. I'll call that, talk to that as we go. Then what I did over a long period of time was um, I actually looked at what do companies need to be able to be effective. And what surprised me was that most companies need mostly the same things. And this is why we were very effective at Net Objectives, is because we identified what these were, and then we go into companies and help them do it in a way that's particular to them, that meets their context. So what to do that, however, required a kind of a GPS, so to speak. Where are you? Where do you want to go? And then the patterns, remember I call it the Capabilities and Patterns project because these two tie together. The capabilities are what you need to accomplish, and we use patterns to figure out how to best manifest it for their situation. Okay. Now, we didn't actually call it patterns at the time, but that's basically what we were doing. I studied Chris Alexander's work, I think it was in the 90s, early 90s, and I'll talk a lot about him so we understand what patterns are, because there are a lot of terms about patterns that are bandied around that are not accurate, and or they're accurate, but they're a different definition than Alexander's pattern. So I want to be clear what it is. And all the while we're doing this, we're attending to how people react, think, learn, resist. This is very critical. This has been kind of just forgotten in the agile space, which is one of the big, oh my God, how could people do this? Yeah, I know they're coaching workshops and all that. And I saw the Scrum Alliance just added another coaching workshop, which is great. But coaching needs to be integrated into your approach, because if you're going to come up with ideas and learn ideas and you cannot convey them to other people, they're not that useful. They're not an afterthought. They need to be an integration of what's happening. So, in addition to that, because you're trying to convey this, you need a support system. And it needs to be learned with affordable, effective, convenient, continuous education. This is my second major goal with success engineering. I think it's important to lower the cost of individual continuous education. Be careful. I'm not saying all sorts of training. Training where somebody goes in and they do a workshop. So you do product management or you learn how to code, things like that that are specialized for a small group. Very, very, very valuable and necessarily somewhat expensive because you've got one trainer for 10, 20, 30 people maybe to be effective. I'm talking about continuous education like we're doing here in the Amplio community practice, which is actually free. But in Amplio University, we go much deeper and broader, and it's still just $1,000 for the first 6 months, 800 if you want to continue for 100 hours of training every 6 months. That's huge and that's inexpensive. It's affordable. There's this huge gap between where we are and what we know how to do. It also is about learning in the workplace, not in the workshop. You don't really learn in workshops. You get exposed to new ideas in workshops. So by stretching it out over time, it's helpful. Now, the reason I kind of, oops, the reason I kind of have decided to do this patterns and capability project is I have been seeing how people have consistently been misunderstanding me. Okay. Now, the fact is, when something gets consistently misunderstood, it's not the people. It's however you're framing it. I've accused other people of this and I accept the responsibility myself. Some of the things I do with patterns and capabilities is not done elsewhere. What people tend to do is take anything new and put it into their own understanding first. That's normal. This is called being a human being. This is not a bad thing. But whether it's a bad thing or not a thing, it doesn't matter. It is what happens. It's reality. It's nice to rant against reality every now and then. I won't say I never do it, but then I calm down and stop. So, then I pick it up later. I know, but you get what I'm saying. It's the way it is. So you got to accept that it's the way it is. So what I decided to do with this project, I figured the best way to learn this then is do it a little bit. The best way to learn, I used to say the best way to learn is to do, but I actually think the best way to learn is to co-create because we've been doing this in Amplio University and it's been very effective that way. Okay. So why we need a GPS and patterns are part of this whole system. It comes from the choice. So this is a brilliant book. This is one of my favorite books that I've read, and it's one of the most important books I think that's important. And he talks about if people think reality is complex, they look for sophisticated solutions. There's more training about how we can't do things even that I just think makes things hard. If we don't believe there's an answer, we will struggle and we'll give up. We won't get out of our box. So if I'm not sure that there is a solution, I'll stop. And then I just excuse it away. A tautology, circular reasoning. This sets up troubles with management. And we say managers are bad, but they don't understand. I love this quote, a comfort zone has less to do with control and more to do with knowledge. Okay. I can't actually see how to get rid of this. I should have taken the permission off, but whoever put that line, you can erase that if you would. That would be great. Otherwise, we'll just have it up there. Okay. So the requirements of the GPS, it's like, where are you? Where do you want to go? I think I've got it backwards. You're in New York. I'd like to go to Seattle because that's where I live. Can you get there? What's the navigation? Things of that nature. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I mean when I say a GPS. Okay. So I'm going to just create the capabilities. I'm going to show you the Amplio GPS. This is still in progress, so my animation is wonky, but it'll give you the idea. You don't have to see the whole thing at once. So we start with the idea, what's the focus on success? So I go into a client, and this is where this came from, my going into clients, and I would ask them what was their success criteria. Had they identified critical stakeholders? Had they got what I call strategic pillars? This is like, what's your strategy? What's the basis for your strategies? Do you have a business architecture? Are you taking on an overarching view of things? And these little check boxes, this can be done in a collaborative board. We're actually moving it probably to Fig Jam. Uh, but I'm also going to have a PowerPoint of this where the consultant can manually do it in talking to people. And what I have done in the past, this is where the idea of the generic value stream or came from in the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant workshop. I'd figured this out just before I was acquired or my IP was acquired by the PMI. I think I might have called it the idealized value stream back then. But what I would do is I would do this on a whiteboard. This was pre-COVID. But I would talk to them about this and I wouldn't explain how you do these. I would just explain these as objectives and people got it. I'll admit, when I first tried this at an open space, I was surprised, but it worked. And then I would go to, well, what about strategy and budgeting? Do you have strategies? How do you get them? How do you budget? And I would just talk to them, and they understand what this is because I'm coming from a business value stream, so to speak. And I would ask them, how you doing? And I wouldn't ask them what they were doing. I just would ask them if they're having challenges. And then I would put like a red bar if it was really bad or a yellow bar if it was not so good. And I wouldn't worry if they were doing a great job because I wanted a board that showed the different things. And then uh, would see the would see the places that they had troubles. Juanita, you've got to stop using your marker. This is messing this up. Okay, try to erase it. You should be able to erase this. That's weird. I don't even see you in the list. Oh, it's probably not a full list again. Ah, thank you. Thank you. Very good. Um, and that's on me because I should make it not possible for you to do that. So apologies. Uh, then I get into product management. What actions are we going to take? How do we actually allocate? See, budgeting is one thing. Agile allocation is another thing. Uh, uh, how do you go from strategies to your initiatives to what I call multiple value increments? I mean, minimum valuable increments. I don't actually say it that way, and I might need to change this label. It's like the next piece I'm going to release. So as I go here, what I'm doing is I'm going through this process, and what we have here are basically different capabilities that are needed. Okay. They don't even need to know how to do them. They may not, but they always have a sense of what they are. In fact, that's a test right here. Do you have a sense of what they are? What I mean by this, if you don't, raise your hand, let's talk about it. But I think intuitively, because you've had experience building things, we can actually see that there's something here. Now, this added thing is more a question of how our artifacts work. And I used to call this attend to the customer journey, but people don't necessarily know what it is. So what you're really doing is attending to the needs of stakeholders, and you're looking to create improvements in how they work. Now, we've had discussions as a stakeholder, a customer as a customer stakeholder, and some people say, oh, those are internal customers and things like that. But I don't want to do that. I want to call them stakeholders. I'll tell you why. If you're an airline, do you think the FAA is a customer? I don't think so. They are a stakeholder. You better pay attention to them. They are going to give you constraints. They are not a customer of yours. But when we think about how to do this, we want to pay attention to all those people, the sponsoring stakeholders, the constraining stakeholders that are customers. And a lot of what happens in organizations is they merrily go along the way here without attending to this. So this is a big capability, not just a capability to figure out what the customers need, but to make sure you've got the constraints. One of your stakeholders could be the security guru in your organization that says we need security, and here's what we need to do with it. That's a stakeholder. He or she's not a customer. They're not paying for it. They're giving you constraints. Stakeholders are either sponsoring, consuming, or constraining. They're different types of stakeholders. They're not all equally important. Some are more critical than others. There's a little more to the GPS in that we also have, there's the foundations, and I want to show you where this is because this is one of the distinctions of patterns, the way I use them and the way they're sometimes used outside of Amplio or just used in the industry. And then there's also roles. Okay, and we've got these as separate. Now we have to remember roles are not people. People fill roles. And one person can fill multiple roles or the same role at multiple teams. This assigning people and roles is the same thing as a costly mistake. Okay, so I'm going to pause for 1 minute. Do you get a sense of what all these pieces are? And the value creation structure is how y'all are organized. Okay, so here's the full page again. And what's useful about this, and it's one of the things that's nice about being an Amplio University, is you get this in an interactive collaborative board. We're actually finishing up. We had another one, but this is much cleaner and simpler. And the more we work on it, the cleaner and simpler it gets, even though it's fairly sophisticated. Okay, well, raise your hands as they go. Okay, now patterns are interesting. This comes from the timeless way of building. I'm a huge fan of Christopher Alexander's perspective. In the mid-90s, I read his stuff, and it really was both confusing and illuminating, and I disagreed with some of it. And after it took me about, I don't know, 6 months to really get it, maybe longer. No, actually, I would say it took me 6 months of trying to get it before I got it, but I'd read about it 2 or 3 years before then. But you can't really get something until you apply it. And this comes from a timeless way of building. Patterns as solutions, which is how people think of them, are useful. But it's more useful at how to create systems based on patterns. His approach to design is look at the whole and decompose it. This is not reductionist thinking. You can decompose reductionist by taking the parts out. But Alexander basically is telling us to look at the whole. For example, let's come back to this. Look at these components. Each one of these fits into the larger whole. That's why I've got the feedback loops. And this is what these all interact with each other. I'm very well aware I'm in a system. I don't define how to do ops without attending to the big system. I don't look at how I do allocation without looking at the whole system. This is not reductionist system. Decomposition can be a reductionist approach, but I don't believe in it. I break it down and Alexander tells us how to do this. Okay. And then what's important is each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again, and we can create a different solution. It gives us the core solution, but we can create a different one over and over without it ever being the same because your contexts are different. This is why it's been called patterns are solutions to recurring problems in a context. It's just not a solution that's out there that might be useful. That could have negative consequences. Why? Because you might be using it in the wrong context. So this is a very important thing. Now on page 545, and I love holding this book up. It's a little bit shaped like a Bible. And it's kind of like my Bible when it comes to design, because as I said, it was illuminating and intimidating and controversial to me. But I have spent now about 25 years trying to disprove his theories, because that's the best way to prove a theory, is you keep trying to disprove it. And after a while, you find out when you can't disprove it, well, somebody might disprove it. It's never proven, because there might be an exception. But I've tried using his design approach in dozens of industries with dozens of clients, and I can't see yet where it doesn't work. So I'm pretty confident that it's good universally as an approach, not as a solution. That's quite different. And on the back, toward the end, he says at this final stage, the patterns are no longer important. They've taught you to be receptive to what's real. What's real? What's real is, oh, sorry, I think I hit the button. Um, what's real is to look at the issues that are present. I thought I had that in there, but I guess. Um, okay. So when we look at what systems are, we are not building systems by the pieces in isolation. You're looking at how it works and around it. Like if you have a car and the engine breaks, you don't just put in a better engine, you put in a better engine designed for that car. Everything has to be within the context of things. You cannot build it in isolation. This is why it's sometimes problematic to do an at scale approach starting at this team and then trying to scale it. That doesn't work because the way you started the team may not work much at the whole. Okay, so we can use patterns as building blocks, but they have to be able to be contextualized. Now you can see this yourself in architecture, which is what Alexander was. He was an architect. And what was kind of interesting is he was vilified and adored by other architects. A lot of architects hated him. Why? Because he said our bad architecture is due to bad architects. People don't like to hear that. What do you mean I'm a bad architect? I'm not a bad architect. You're a bad architect. Stop telling me how I might learn because it makes me feel bad like I don't know what to do. Serious. That's kind of the attitude that was there. Maybe they didn't use those words. But a lot of architects said this guy was really brilliant because they understood it was a different way of doing design. And then you work on the small pieces. Now you can see this yourself. Okay, I used to live in California for about just a couple of years and maybe longer, 3, 4 years. And in California, as in other places, Seattle has this as well, but a lot of California is new, relatively speaking. And you go into a living complex where they built a lot of houses. They're cookie cutter, no soul. You know what I'm talking about? They just, oh, here are the 5 plans. Let's pack them together just as they fit on the lot. That's good. That's building by components. That's the reductionist way of building things. Think of an old, like an Italian village or a Swiss village, something that's been there for hundreds of years that did not have a master plan, just built organically. And the reason they're the way they were is, and I'm not saying master plans are bad, but what I'm saying is when they built each thing, they did it within the context of the surroundings. And you see this hundreds of years ago. This is kind of how they did it. And that's just been lost in modern architecture to a large extent. So each part is given its specific form in the context of the whole. So what is a pattern? They provide solutions to a problem by attending to the context the problem is showing up in and the issues involved. It's got to have a name, a context, the challenge being solved. They're not just out there. They're not solutions wandering around. They're identified toward solving a challenge. Now, I'm going to say, and this is my binding of capabilities to patterns. You don't start with the patterns. You start with the capabilities. What are you trying to accomplish? What are your problems in accomplishing them? Let me just go back to this. I should probably remember the slide number so I can just jump to it. Sorry. I remember how to jump back. See, this is what we're trying to accomplish. When people tell me where they're having problems, I got a problem. How can we solve this? Oh, there's a pattern to solve this problem. So what Amplio does for every capability, there's a pattern associated with it. And sometimes those patterns break down into sub patterns like planning. You can plan for a team, you can plan for a few teams, you can plan for hundreds of teams, big room planning. So there's a planning pattern, but then it helps you go to which sub pattern to go to. So this is very important. Patterns are about solving challenges. And I've created, you could say, a pattern language based on the capabilities needed. And the patterns are used to manifest a solution within your context. Okay. What are the forces? Well, how the hell do I know what the forces are? I'm going to tell you how you can figure that out yourself, but I'm going to give you some guidance. Not so you believe me. Please do not ever believe anything I say. Why? Because I'm not God. I don't know everything. And I certainly, even when I know it, don't always say it clearly. So first I could be wrong. You're not God either, by the way. So if you think I said something wrong, well, maybe I did and maybe I didn't, but don't believe me because if you believe me, it's and don't disbelieve me because then it's the end of the conversation. Have a conversation about it. This is how I talk to people when I start an engagement. See, that difference is where learning takes place. That misunderstanding is something that if you misunderstood it, or if I said it in a way that has you misunderstood it, that's worth you knowing and it's worth me knowing because now I can improve how I speak it. So everybody wins. So how the forces are, I've got to kind of get to this, other related patterns, okay, and then potential implementations, because life refigure things out. This is something that also is an important mindset of Amplio. We need to avoid cognitive overload, no question. I've been known to be like getting a drink of water from a hot fire hydrant, so I'm very well versed in how to do cognitive overload. I'm an expert here. That's not a compliment. But but that's the problem, cognitive overload, not too much information in the system. It's how you get to the information. Imagine if overnight Wikipedia doubled the number of entries they had. It wouldn't make it harder to use. You would search for it and all that. One of the beauties of AI, or they're really large language models. It's not artificial intelligence, but I'll just use the word A. Well, I'm going to call them LMMs, large or LLMs, large language models instead of AI. There are different kinds of AI. There's generative AI, there's programming AI, there's all sorts of good stuff. But what I'm talking about are LLMs like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Grok, things of that nature. And what's good about them is they will go through all this and find the information for you. What's bad about it is the generic ones are using the massive information out there that's mediocre, and some of it's old. These search engines or LLMs do not know how to get rid of old information. It just keeps getting piled onto the heap. So the stuff that's been surpassed is still in there, and it's hard for them to tell if they're good or bad. This is going to get worse as it goes on. I'm not alone in this opinion either. So what you want are specialized LLMs, and I'm actually working on this with a couple of my associates. You know, pulling in basically a all of my material and hopefully some other people that'll give me permission, like Tom Gilbs, and there's some other people out there who will. So you have an LLM that actually has just good information in it and not a lot of the crap that's out there. Okay. All the work we do here is going to be under Creative Commons and is going to go into this LLM as well. And we'll tag it, which is in the Creative Commons and which isn't. But I'm pretty sure anything I put in this LLM is going to be Creative Commons. There's a variety of things in Amplio University that will not go into this because that's kind of a premier track. Uh, but I want to set that background a little bit anyway. Okay. So what we need to know is you can't build a good system from the pieces. You got to focus on how they go together. And here's the key. And I think actually I'm ready to go. I think I've kind of said this, is that how I kind of identify these. Okay. Um, okay. I've gotten as far as I want to in this. So what do I mean by forces? I'm going to pause though again for questions. There'll be a little second just to distill this idea. How do we build all this? How do we build the patterns? I'm going to be setting up the infrastructure where we can store these. I had a lot of the capabilities already written in a document that's actually out on Google Docs, but it was organized as a book to teach you how to use Amplio at the team level. And what I'm doing now is I've decided to integrate. In fact, that might be something just to switch to now. I'm integrating um, no, I'm integrating my works into this thing called the Amplio body of knowledge. And this body of knowledge is going to have about half of the a book that Paul Stewart and I wrote on coaching. It's going to have this development book I had written, but it wasn't completed. And I'm organizing it around the capabilities because I think that's a more useful way to do it. Uh, and this gives you a better navigation because we're not trying to, it's the second, Thomas, we're not trying to just give you lots of good stuff. We're trying to give you a navigation tool. Yeah, Thomas, please.
Yeah, so in previous versions of the Amplio GPS, you had emphasized that a company should, there are some capabilities or patterns that it should do more of to achieve
Yes.
a certain outcome. And there are some other things that it should do less of that
Yes.
prevent good outcomes. Would it make sense to create some sort of list of anti-patterns as well?
Yeah, well, you bring up two really good issues here. Not all, in fact, it's funny. Before presentation, I always have certain thoughts in the middle of the night, like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? Uh, and this was one of the issues. So I'm really glad you brought it up. So not all of these are equal, and not all of these are independent. Why? They're in a system. So some of these you've got to do sooner than later. Okay, so that's first of all something to be aware of. So one of the things I don't have here, because uh, it makes it more complicated, is another tool that I'll bring up. So this is something that maybe we'll expose more in the community of practice than we do now, but are what we call the Amplio Capabilities spreadsheet. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll put this over here to the right so you can see the color coding. See the success, strategy and budgeting, product management, development workflow, etc. Then there's some other things too. Well, I have that in there in the foundations, value stream management. So in this diagram, see the idea is you use this marking these to fill out this. And in this is where we talk about which are the important ones to typically do first, which are dependent on others, and what some anti-patterns are, and what happens if you don't do it. Now, this is what we're trying to build, is some of this extra detail you just talked about. Okay. The reason I'm doing this whole project is twofold. One selfish and one, well, threefold. Selfish, helpful, and learning. So the selfish one is this endeavor is just way too much for me to handle and keep a sane life. Okay, I'm just being candid about it. I can't do this by myself. But besides that, it's not the right way to do it anyway. Yes, I've incorporated literally the perspectives of hundreds of consultants over the last 2 decades. I calculated once I probably had 10,000 conversations with practitioners and consultants at all levels. I used to go to conferences all the time. And it wouldn't surprise me. Most of the time I'd go to a conference, I'd have 3 or 4 days of conference. I would be at the conference every minute and every evening, except for maybe one, take my wife out to dinner. And I put her up in nice hotels, so she didn't mind. She was taken care of, I assure you. But all day and all night, I was talking to people. And I once calculated, given I went to so many conferences, it was 10,000 conversations. And I wasn't trying to sell them on anything. I was trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And these patterns are the result of it, or these capabilities are the result of it, and seeing the orders you had to do. And then it took me years to figure out the science underneath it and the physics of flow, as it's been called. So, uh, there's an unlimited amount of knowledge here that can be distributed because it's not mine, it's all of yours and other people's. So the selfish reason is to take some of it off my back. The learning reason is you will learn better as you do it. So it's a great way to learn. And one of my big mantras in life now is trying to get this capability gap minimize, as I call it. Like, here's what's been done, and here's what we're generally doing. And now people are scared because AI is raising the bar. And people are scared. But I'll tell you, don't be afraid of AI, except like if you're in the middle of the road and traffic's coming, get out of the road. Yes. But you don't have to be afraid of the cars if you pay attention. There are opportunities to put you well ahead of everybody else who's not thinking but is following. See, there are two or three things AI can't do. It can't think, not really. It can only distill. It also cannot empathize with people. It can act like it's empathizing with people. In fact, decades ago, somebody wrote a simple computer program, I forget the name of it now, that used words that people interpreted to mean empathy and all that. And the professor's secretary who knew what he was doing would talk to it like it was a person because it made her feel good, but it didn't know what it had no consciousness. So it can't think, it can't empathize, and it doesn't know how to coach. And I'm not talking about coach as a facilitator, and I'm not talking about coaching as a do this. That's not coaching. Coaching is you have interactions with people so they show up in their work in a better way. And that's often providing insights and working with them and answering questions. Okay. So coming back to this. Oh, okay. So again, what this is, so this is part of it. Now, what I also have to do, and this will take another few weeks before we get started, I'm starting at the organization. There is another set of patterns for capabilities at the team. And I actually talk about this. If you're trying to go from Scrum, you could ignore Scrum if you want to on this, if you're not using it. But if you're going from Scrum, I show how you can go to add more to it and improve it. This is what I call the team GPS, and that will be added. The team GPS kind of lives here in these three things. I have to highlight that I haven't yet. But the reason I have a separate team GPS is you have one organization and multiple teams, and the multiple teams are in different contexts and work differently. So I didn't try to combine them. I did think about it once, but it wasn't a long conversation. Okay. Because you need a way to diagnose at the team and a way to diagnose at the organization. So thanks for the reminder, Thomas, because yeah, I definitely have to put we have some highlights here, how you score it, how you feel you are, it's ready to implement. Is it going to cause overload? You can't do everything at once. You'll overload people. You got to pick which are the highest things to
Yeah,
do.
if I may, I think
Please.
in your answer, you addressed more the question of how do I prioritize if I have 10 things that I should be doing, but I can only do three things. Which three do I pick? My point was more around, in addition to doing those 10 things, there's also these five things that you should stop doing in
Right.
order to achieve better outcomes. And that's not clearly visible from the GPS.
No,
But I
it's
think
not in the
around
GPS. I
the
agree.
value coaching, you have a lot of those aspects of
Okay,
how
well, there are
do
two
you
ways.
avoid resistance and such on.
Yeah, so there are two things about this. Typically, every anti-pattern is anti to something. So I believe that the capabilities that by saying what happens if you don't do it will cover the anti-patterns. But that said, there's some real power there's some real power in having a list of things that are wrong. And this is where this board is something we use in Amplio University. And I guess actually I should make sure I integrate this into the GPS. So uh, I've attended to it, but you're right, I haven't integrated into the GPS. So I really like what you're saying. Uh, I think I've got the wrong one here. No, hang on a second. Um,
And was that the problems and opportunities and challenges?
Yes, that wasn't what I was showing, but that's the one I want.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what I referred to, that in the past you have had sort of, here are the things that you should do more of, and here are the things you should do less of.
Yes. So I just take one other minute. I don't know why I usually this pops right up. Here, let me just look for challenges. And it's also the misbeliefs. Um, no, it's not just challenges. It's
It's at the bottom, problems and disempowering beliefs,
thank
perhaps.
you. You see how multiple people working together is an improvement? Yeah, so this is a collection of three boards, and I'm really glad you brought this up because it's important to kind of integrate this in, and I'll be candid, I wasn't quite thinking about it. So we can have that there are problems. You can look at this as problems that are present. So we'll be able to do this, and I'll set this to navigate into the GPS. And here are the solutions. These will be the patterns. There's an attitude Amplio has to count to counter disempowering beliefs. because there are a lot of disempowering beliefs. Like this is the biggest disempowering belief in existence right now, that there's no theory to explain underlying cause and effect. I'd been searching for this for 15 years because I remember when I started looking for it about 2004. And it wasn't until I read The Choice that I totally got what I was looking for. I just kept feeling I was closer, 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 but never getting there. Okay, then they're missing concepts. So I will start myself looking at this, um, uh, tying this in. And this will give us the anti-patterns. Now, all right, so there was something I had said that I wanted to go into, but I guess it'll come back to me later. Okay, so I want to show you some ways to navigate information. Now, normally after this session, the next sessions will be more of a working opportunity, and I'll definitely stop if I have some presentation to leave the last 20 minutes, as we talked once before about for Q&A, but not today, because I've just got to make sure I get the full background. I want to get things started where you can do some studying between now and next week when we actually get down to brass tacks, so to speak, and work. So this is the website, my website, successengineering.works. And if you click, you don't even need to click, just hover over, you'll see there's the Amplio Capabilities and Patterns project. Okay. And in here, what I've got is in the left column, I have a little bit about Amplio as a framework of capabilities and two types of reductionist speaking, which I've already talked about. And this is a little bit of the background I've just described on the left. And I'll have to put an updated, oh, I did already, great. Uh, this is the rationale for it. On the right is a lot of the content that I've been referring to. You know, I refer to the books here, but more important, I have why theory is important. The difference between patterns and solutions. This was great because this has been a little bit controversial for me to talk about how some patterns uh, are not as useful because, wait, no, but I think I'm pulling up the wrong thing here. Hang on a second. Right here. This was my view of it. And then I decided to ask Perplexity and Grok because they can argue with me that I'm biased or something like that. But Perplexity and Grok are just two good AI tools. Okay, so I asked them, what's the difference between a pattern being defined as a solution to a recurring problem in a context, and one is a solution to a recurring problem, just as to a recurring problem in one context. And this is important to get this distinction. Okay. And what I did is I actually blended their answers. They were incredibly consistent with each other. The reason I blended them was simply some explained some parts better than the other. Neither Perplexity nor Grok gave an overall better answer, and there was no inconsistency between the response. But I'm trying to zoom in a little bit. Uh, what you have is the solution is kind of general, but when you have a context, it can be very specific. Without a context, it may be applied inappropriately. Like you're mentioning, Thomas, this would be an anti-pattern. Taking a solution to a problem, but not attending to the context you're in can backfire. Complexity. There's always some nuance in things. And then do they provide how to tell this? So this is really important. Now, I want to show you some resources because you can work in this project any number of ways. One is you just follow along, and that's certainly acceptable, and you're certainly going to learn. Another way is just jump in and do things, but don't worry about understanding. And that actually is a good way to get understanding. It'll just take you a little longer, but there's nothing wrong with that. You have day jobs, hopefully, and it's keeping you busy. You may not have time to go more. But this right side is stuff to pay attention to. Read this. They're not that long. But in addition to all this, go to the resources I provide. And one of the biggest ones is the YouTube playlist. Now, right now, I already have a community of practice playlist, and there's a lot of good stuff here. This has got a lot of the sessions I've had in the past. And a lot of this are the foundations, which are basically from here to here. So Chris Alexander, I've got an hour review on how to use Alexander. So if you want to know more about that, go through. these other things, you'll notice that goes from 4 months to 11 months. These are ones I did a ways back. You really only need to go through the first 10. Okay. So this is another place to learn. I mean, I've got days of training out there, and after today, we'll always have 20 minutes of Q&A. So as you study, please ask questions. If you didn't understand something I said, I'd like to know about it because what? I might be wrong. You may have misunderstood it. I may have said it poorly. It'll move everything forward. I'm going to also create a new playlist. This will be the first one called the Amplio Community, the Amplio Capabilities and Patterns. So every one of these sessions over the next few months, because I think this is going to be a 3 to 6 month project, will have its own session. But there are a lot of good things here. Okay. This is another thing I'm open to requests for. I call these mini lessons. You can see they're pretty short. Is people don't understand really why teams get so much waste when they get interrupted or where their capacity goes. So sometimes something to explain to management, I add that as well, and that's useful. Um, Now, one last thing to pay attention to is this. And I may change this. I'm not quite sure how to do this, but if you go to Amplio University in the curriculum, you'll see that some of these are links. So this is another way to get access to information. Like if you want this, Blast is well, it's not my version of Scrum at Scale because I predated it. And Scrum at Scale was actually created at a place I'd done Blast first. So it kind of built on some of the knowledge there. They didn't copy it. It was nothing like that, but I'd given them some of the keen insights. So there's a lot of good stuff here. You can go, and I have this is all, I talk about it. If you want a simple like Scrum at Scale type thing, that would be a good place to read. The Amplio Foundations I'm talking about. I mean, there's literally like 8 to 10 hours of stuff here that you can get into. I remember now where I was going. Sorry, I admit I kind of lost it a little bit. Let me pull it up now. Okay. So remember we talked about forces. What are these forces he's talking about? Obviously, it's not how we're building houses and things. Um, sorry. I know I'm jumping around. I forgot where something is. I just remembered. Okay. Let's come back to the capabilities and patterns project. I want to go through an example of the courtyard pattern. This again, the capabilities where I said read here on the right. And this is very important, is just as an example, so it's a little less fuzzy. So he talks about a courtyard. So you know what a courtyard is. You've got a house and there's an open space. Universities always have what they call the quad. Usually it's not always called the quad, but it's often called the quad. One of the prettiest quads I've ever seen is Harvard. When I went to MIT, I would sometimes walk down to that part of Cambridge. MIT was near the river, and Harvard was a couple of miles away. And I lived in the middle, so I could walk to either one easily enough. And Harvard was really beautiful because it's an old school. They kept a lot of the trees. And their courtyard was a classic example. It was open, it was surrounded by buildings, but it was a kind of private outdoor space. Now that sounds funny, right? But by private outdoor space, it meant you could find the nook under a tree and feel like you're by yourself. And at the same time, you could look out into the beauty. You had crossing paths so people would go out. When you have a courtyard that's too tightly enclosed, no view out, people feel uncomfortable. They tend to stay away. Thomas, this is the anti-patterns you're talking about. When the forces are wrong, when things are wrong. If they pass in and out of a courtyard every day in the course of their normal lives, the courtyard becomes familiar. See, the reason I have a fond memory of the courtyard is this is where I had my first so-called argument because Alexander wasn't there. But what I like to do is challenge people's ideas. And he was talking about this courtyard. And I remembered a courtyard in Cambridge when I would walk to MIT, or ride my unicycle to MIT or my bike, depending on how I wanted to get there. And I remembered one day I came across this gorgeous, amazing, one of the prettiest courtyards I'd ever seen. And I was thinking, well, it didn't have crossing paths. It didn't have a view. Alexander's wrong. And then I thought about it. Al, how many times did you go to that courtyard? Once. And I'm not even sure I could have found it again. And why? Because it didn't have crossing paths, like he said. So is that a good courtyard? Not really. I mean, it's good private courtyard, but not a good public courtyard. So it was like that's how I challenged it. As I would when I would come up with a case that disagreed with him, I would then look to see if in fact he was right based on the forces and the issue of it being useful. A beautiful courtyard that is never used is not useful. Might be beautiful, but it's not a good courtyard. It's not where people come to life in it. So that's what we're talking about. Okay. So again, I suggest you spend some time on this in the next week. Now, what are the forces? Hang on. The forces are in this document, and I'll put all this together. This has been out there for a long time. These are first principles. Now, a lot of people believe that there aren't first principles that you could figure out what's going on, but I wrote a post somewhat in anticipation of this 10 hours ago, I guess just before I went to bed last night. Yeah, in fact, I remember I was going to bed. I said, oh, I'm going to write this up. And here's how you can discover first principles of knowledge work. I know it's complex. I know it means, but it isn't all complex. There's no such thing as a complex domain. There's complexity in our work, but the whole domain isn't complex. There's some things you always know. So here's one way to find it, and you could do this. This is what I call verifiable first principles. So you have people working as many things as possible and not worry about the multitasking this causes. You know that's going to make it worse, right? Or don't worry about getting feedback or acting on it quickly when you get it. It's going to make things worse. When problems occur, look for someone to blame. Overload people so you know they're fully utilized. Never say no, but work on everything requested, no matter how important. Take on big projects and don't bother to decompose them into smaller releases. Don't talk about new ideas. Don't let anyone know what you're doing. Have everyone do their best without worrying how it might affect others. Just attend to your own work. Specialize in what you know and hand things off to other people who are specialists in their own area. This is called waterfall, by the way. Don't do these things. The first principles are the opposite of these things. These are the first principles right here that I came up with. There are others. I didn't pick these 10 arbitrarily. They're the 10 that explain most of the behavior. So one of the other things I have here, by the way, are what are verifiable first principles and why they're so important. So if you get grounded in this, this is a promise to you. If you get grounded in this stuff I've been talking about here, and you don't take any other workshop from anybody, you will be much better than you are now if you don't already know this stuff. This is what I really use to make decisions, is this background stuff. The importance of patterns is it makes it concrete, and we can learn more with that concreteness. So that's why we go learn this stuff. Okay. I think I had one last thing, and I got 5 minutes to do it in, and I think that is actually all I need. Let me just check. Let me just get rid of these so I can make sure. But I had one other screen up here. Nope, I think I've got it all. Okay, so let's just look at something real quick and get an example of what I mean. So let's say we had a pattern that was associated with planning. Okay, I talked about a capabilities. Let's just use planning because planning is a good example. So what's the context? See, now here it's actually maybe this is not a good example because it's the context is, well, there are several contexts to planning as a capability. So this is part of the structure I'll be making is, well, what are the different contexts available? You tell me. I'll write some down as I hear them, or I'll put some down if I don't hear any. But give me a different context for planning.
Well, you might have a backlog of things you might want to do.
That's a solution. But when would you have it? What's the context where you'd want a backlog?
If you have many competing requirements
Okay, so you can have many competing requirements across teams or one team with many competing requirements
across teams, across stakeholders, right?
across stakeholders. Yeah. So actually, when you think about it that way, some of the forces would be how many stakeholders there are, how many teams are involved, what's the time frame? Aren't those issues you'd look at?
Yeah, which are critical, which are not so
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about, what a pattern would look like. And but what I would suggest, yeah, so that's actually enough. I'm just trying to get a thing of what to look at because see, let's come back to here. Let's come back to here. Besides these first principles, what I came up with is, well, these are great, but these are a little abstract, right? I mean, you can see that they're true, but they're still abstract. So I also added this thing I call factors for effective value streams. In other words, what Thomas just said, I'll bet you, let's just see if what he just said is in here. Like, which are valuable? What's the acceptance criteria? Are they small? These are maybe they're not small. A force might be this stakeholder is giving me big stuff. This stakeholder is giving me little stuff. Which ones can I do? We might find we need to expand the factors for effective algorithms. Again, I tried keeping it to 10, not as a completeness, but as what's most effective. But these aren't meant to be a complete guide. These do not explain all of the issues. The forces will come from the context and what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so here's my question to you and what I'll be doing over the next few days. Now, let me tell you what I'm going to do over the next few days. And my question to you is I'm going to organize a Google Doc, and I'm using Google Doc at this point. They're not my favorite document, but they allow for two things that Word does not allow even on OneDrive, which is OneDrive does allow you to collaborate two people in the thing at the same time, but it doesn't allow you to jump into the middle of the document. And I think that's important because I don't want 50 documents, one for each pattern. I could do that, but I don't think that's a good idea from my experience in working in collaborative efforts. So with Google Drive, each chapter will have you can link it to each chapter. So I'll have a table of contents. You can go there and then link to each one. You can also link to it from outside. So I'm still in the process of setting that up. I've been working on this, uh, and it's going to take me another few hours, but I'll get this done the next 2 or 3 days. And I'll probably give it to you before it's complete. The book will be in two parts. One part that's organized and that way, and the other part I'm moving into the organized part. But I want to focus first on the capabilities because that'll create the pattern, the context for the patterns. So when we look back at this thing, when we look back at this thing, see every one of these fits in the context of the overarching view. So planning. When we look at planning in this way, we notice there are multiple stakeholders. We notice that we have to have some method of requirements in a product backlog. How big the product backlog is unclear. That can change. Are we planning quarterly? Are we planning annually? Do you see how a planning event that's a week or a month or 3 months or a year would be quite different? Those are different contexts. But you can't see that if you look at everything individually. This is one of the big challenges with a lot of frameworks. They take a way to do it, a way to do it, a way to do it, a way to do it individually instead of looking at the whole. Frameworks designed from a reductionist decomposition approach are inherently going to be difficult to get good values out of because you're going to have everything competing against everything, not attending to everything. And then when it doesn't work, the creators of it get to call you doing it improperly because the fact that it's almost impossible to do it properly, they ignore. This lets you look at everything as a whole. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to change instantly because what you need to do is educate people, but this is a way of educating people. Educating people has to be part of your process, or expect resistance, expect low uptake. And if they don't get it and you're not educating them, that's on you, not on them. That's what I call responsibility. Okay, we're a little bit past time, but I'm going to just pause for any questions. I'll hang out here as long as people want to get questions answered. Here's my question to you though, and please ask me what I left out. Have I given you enough to get started and at least do a little research on your own? So next week we'll go through, I'll show you the infrastructure, and we'll actually build a few patterns. But what I also want you to look at is validate that these, or invalidate that this is enough. And it might be like things I haven't talked about. See, like product backlog, well, this has sub prioritization. It has prioritization as a subcategory of it. I don't have that there. So I'm going to need to tease this out to make that clear. You, anybody feel there's something else I need to say to get you going? Because if you're not ready to go, that's on me, not on you. So please speak up, because if you have that thought, somebody else in the room or rooms has that thought. Okay. I'm available. This is a good place. One last thing. This is a good place. If you've not joined things, you can you can send me emails with questions, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So please don't, because all I'm going to do is tell you to I'm just going to tell you to go to this group, which you should have gotten an email about. I'll put the link on the project. I should have done that already. But ask me here, okay? Because I don't have the time to do this broad thing with hundreds of people possibly, or however many there are at the time, to answer each individual question. But if you have the question, it'll help somebody else. So I'll answer every question put on this group. And if you ask me personally, I'll probably ask you to ask it here in a generic way, so it doesn't betray any NDA. We all good? Okay, I'll post this up, and I'll put this out on the
All right,
COP
Lincoln.
newsletter a little later today.
Traffic on streets.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
good. Thank you. I'm excited about this. I think we
Okay.
can really do some cool stuff.
Thank you.
Road punch. Step up. Wait, why? Up. Wait, why? Up. But why? Get out of my restaurant.